Welcome to Break the Pipeline, brought to you by the law offices of Sauda Johnson PC. I am Sauda Johnson-McNeal, the founder and CEO of the firm. I've been an attorney for over 20 years, and I'm licensed in New York and California.
Hi, I'm Naomi Barerra. I am an attorney licensed in the state of New York, and like Sauda, I have also been practicing for over 20 years.
At Break the Pipeline, we dig into the real-life factors that shape children's lives. As attorneys, we analyze all sides, the legal intent and the real-life impact.
From school discipline and child labor to family conflict and mental health, we explore how laws and decisions can influence the path a child takes.
Our mission is to understand what affects kids and how we can help move them forward. This is Break the Pipeline.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. So our topic today is, are juvenile detention centers still needed? Ooh, this is a good one, Naomi. I actually was talking to my husband this morning about it. I'm like, okay, so what's your opinion? So I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, it hits home for a lot of people, right? Like many of us know that there's family members and friends that have some level of interaction or impact in the juvenile detention center system. And it's been in the news lately, quite
It
a few
has
times,
been
both
in
in
the news lately.
California and New York. So what have you heard in
Cali,
Cali,
okay,
Sal?
so we have the Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall, right? And
Oh,
basically,
that was
yeah,
crazy.
right? So
Crazy.
from July to December 2023, allegedly, I wasn't there, but they said there was about 69 fights, and all these children aged 12 to 18 were basically shown having to fight each other, like Fight Club type of situation. And the guards were the ones who was basically encouraging the fight. It's all bad from my understanding.
Yeah, I actually read an article where a kid who was 13 when he was there described his own experience. Literally, he said if he didn't want to fight, they would threaten him if he didn't fight non-gang affiliated kids. If he didn't want to, he would have to fight gang affiliated kids. And if he didn't agree to that, then they would jump him.
Wow.
New York has been in the news on a number of fronts. There's a sexual abuse case, this woman named Maya Hayes, who's actually a clinician that was hired to provide therapy to these kids, right? Because that's the idea when you go into this juvenile detention center, is that the hope is that these kids are being rehabilitated so they can come back out and join society. Well,
Right.
this woman raped one kid in particular over 30 times, and she claimed that the abuse was part of his therapy. So needless to say, she is currently indicted, and there's lawsuits coming out of this as well in New York. There's also other lawsuits where over 500 adults who were in the system have brought lawsuits against New York State for the abuse that they encountered. Also sexual abuse, by the way.
And Crossroads, right? Horizons, Rikers, these are different places. Am I correct in terms of
That's
the different
correct.
juvie centers? So this kind of sets the stage for the conversation. Are these juvenile centers still needed? Because at the end of the day, what we're telling you is happening not just in California and New York, is happening across the country. Well, let's talk about pipeline impact. So when you have abuse, if you're in custody, that's going to create trauma, PTSD, and the survivors are going to disengage from school. And then basically, again, that's going to push them on that road to creating crimes. And that's that pipeline to prison. I always like to, if I can, throw it in our episodes, even though that's not really what we're focused on today, but I think it's still worth mentioning for this conversation.
So let's talk about it, Sauda. I know that, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be looking at two sides, right? Let's see what the argument is for and or against these juvenile detention centers. Do we need them? Are they helpful? Are the kids being rehabilitated? Are they, joining society, contributing to society, or do they get recriminalized based on their experience at being in one of these centers? What is your take on it?
Well, I think, first of all, Nay, we have to look at the history. Because if we're deciding whether or not a juvenile center should still be around, it's like, okay, if we shut them down, where are they going to go, right? What are the options? They're going to either go back to adult prison. If we talk about the history, then originally that's what happened. Back in the day, kids were actually in adult prisons. Now, Nate, tell the people why that was not a good idea and why the laws changed regarding that.
Well, these kids were subject to abuse. Just in terms of society, what a child can possibly be subjected to being thrown in. Usually, they didn't determine whether it was minimum security or maximum security. They were just throwing the kids in. And a lot of these people didn't care that these were just children. They would subject them to everything from sexual abuse to physical abuse, and even the correction officers, right? It wasn't even just the other inmates. Clearly, it has been established that that is not the way to go for these children.
When you talk about established, then we have to bring up what the law says, because it has been established by the United States Supreme Court, and it has been emphasized that youth must be treated differently than adults, because fundamentally, adults and children, they're different. We just talking about brain development. I mean, I don't even know how much I have to get into this with anyone out there, that a 5-year-old and a 30-year-old don't think the same, right? The 5-year-old still needs someone to take care of them. And in California, there are basically general laws that say if you're under 12, you cannot be prosecuted, except in the case of murder or forcible sex offense crimes.
Well, New York has been through the ringer. At this point, the law says that children under 7 cannot be prosecuted. And then they go through a variety of stages where they can go through family court, or they can just go through the juvenile system. Now, most recently in 19, I don't know if many of you are familiar with the Khalif Browder story. He was a 16-year-old that was sent to Rikers Island, which is an adult prison. And the amount of abuse, both physical and sexual, that he experienced at that facility. He was there over 3 years. Not only did he come out and commit suicide, but it prompted New York State to change the law where 16 and 17-year-olds can no longer be housed in adult prisons. So it's very unfortunate that he experienced that and that he died, but his death has opened the door for law revisions in the state of New York. Also, the bail reform. There's been bail reform that's come out of New York after Khalif Browder, because again, the reason he was in there is because his parents could not afford to pay the amount of bail that was necessary for allegedly stealing a backpack. But this leads us to another problem, Sauda. Some of these 16 and 17-year-olds are now being placed in these juvenile detention centers that were already at capacity. Not only are they understaffed, but some of these older kids, because they're still kids, have created some level of havoc as well in terms of abuse and criminalization. So the question becomes, juvenile detention centers helpful or not?
Let's talk about both sides. So we get rid of these juvenile detention centers, and where are these kids going to go? Because a lot of people, they're of the opinion, hey, we need these juvies because at the end of the day, these kids need to be locked up. You know, somebody kills another child. So if the victim is like an elderly or another child, whether they're 5 or 17, then people say, no, you need to be locked up. You committed an adult crime, and therefore you need to deal with the consequences as an adult. We get rid of these juvie halls. It's not a good idea, because now where are we going to send them? Back to be in adult prison? They have to be locked up. You don't want to put them back with adults. That's the bottom line.
At the end of the day, they are still children. And studies have shown, and even the law supports this, that most kids don't have full brain development until the age of 25. There have been kids who have said, once they become adults, I can't believe I did that as a child, but I have completely turned my life around. There is room for growth. Remember, these children usually come from really difficult backgrounds. So we have to look at what put them in these predicaments. Was there support at home? Did they have educational support? And this is where we talk about breaking the pipeline, right? Some of these kids were kicked out of school because they can't read, or because they have behavior issues without someone addressing the underlying problem. And so they end up in the system. So the argument is there that this system, in theory, is supposed to help these children get rehabilitated.
Okay, so first of all, let's talk about why it's not a good idea to get rid of these juvenile detention centers. You have these kids, and they could be young as 5, and they can go all the way up to 17. They're committing these heinous crimes. Then they need to get locked up, right? That's the one side of the coin. They need to get locked up, and we just simply cannot put them back in prison with adults like back in the day.
Well, there are people in society that are saying they're not helping anyway. We should get rid of them because one, they're understaffed. Secondly, these kids are not coming out and rejoining society and being positive contributors to society. So there is a segment of society that's saying, let's just get rid of these detention centers. They're not being helpful anyway. The purpose that they were created for, to help these children, it's not working. It's not working. So let's just get rid of them.
Okay, I love it. You're giving me the other side of the argument. Why it's actually a good idea to get rid of them, right? So you saying these people are like, they're not helping. Let's go ahead and let them go. And I think that if we do let them go, speaking from the other side of the argument, then we have to think about what are the alternatives. Because if it is a good idea to get rid of them, then where are we going to put these children? So this is what I was thinking. What if we have these different divisions? One is we add a child who's under 12, for example, they are going to go to a specific type of facility. And that's only if they do a crime like murder or rape, because we can't just let them go free, right? But at the same time, we don't want to put them in prison with adults. Then you have the other side of this, which are nonviolent crimes. And that could be basically kids from 5 to 17. And again, I'm thinking of smaller facilities that actually have therapy and school and things of that nature. So if it is a good idea to get rid of them, that would be my argument.
Sauda, let's not forget, who's going to pay for that? You're asking taxpayers to come out of their pocket even more to try to ameliorate a problem that the detention centers clearly couldn't do. And these, like, I hear you in theory, but these different facilities are going to operate in a similar fashion. And who's going to pay for that? That is a concern. Remember, everything in this nation boils down to money. Boils down to money.
Yeah.
Are we all going to buck the bill for these different quote unquote centers now for these different age? I mean, frankly, the argument has to be made. Just throw them all in a prison. Just throw them all in prison.
That's not going to happen. I'm sorry. But even if I have a child who actually, God forbid, commits a crime, I'm probably not going to support him being thrown in jail. So here's what I think to wrap this up, Naomi. I think at the end of the day, right now, there are still juvenile detention centers, right? So we have to look at how we should change these systems while they are in existence. And regardless of what they come up with, which you're right, regarding money, it's going to be difficult to have all these different places, but it's out there right now. People are talking about it. Either way, right now with these juvenile halls, we can change them. We have to have accountability. It has to be about criminal charges for these abusive staff. They have to feel the wrath of what they're doing. There has to be oversight, right? I mean, let's talk about it. What can we do now to change these juvenile detention centers, Nay?
We have to allocate resources, right? We have to allocate resources for therapy. We have to allocate resources for more staff, and staff that's been vetted too. You know, just reminds me of five recent arrests out of New York, where ACS workers were recently indicted for bringing in contraband to a Brooklyn detention center. Everything from marijuana to cell phones to just drugs. And there has to be accountability, and there has to be, as a society, we have to be willing to do the work. And it's unfortunate that these children are in this predicament, but they're there for a reason. And it's my argument now is that we have to do what we can to ensure that these children become positive contributors to our society.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, regardless of which side you're on, we need to figure out what to do with these children, right? If you think we should close these centers down, then we need to talk about what those alternatives are going to be. We have to look at the money that it's going to cost. We have to talk about healing, therapy, safe placements for these kiddos. And if you think we should still keep these juvie centers, then of course we need to talk about that oversight, that monitoring, the consequences for the people who are creating these abusive situations for these kids. Anyway, this is great conversation. And as always, this is Break the Pipeline. And we really want you to come back for the next podcast episode. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed our talk. Our goal with this podcast is to show two opposing views of our society. And it's not necessarily our own opinions, but we do hope that our listeners can understand that There are serious issues, and not everyone is on the same page all the time. And our hope is to bring it to the community at large.
So if you want real talk, compassion, and legal insight from attorneys who care deeply about our youth, you are in the right place. We're the law offices of Sauda Johnson PC, and this is Break the Pipeline.